Hey everyone, it's Rob. Thanks for listening in today. I greatly appreciate your time as always. Now, you are going to love this interview today with Matthew Hepburn, and I'd like to share a bit about him with you. Now, you'll learn very quickly that Matthew is a straight shooting, clear thinking, and dedicated meditation teacher. His personal practice caught fire over the course of several extended meditation retreats back in his early 20s. And for the last 5+ years, he's been teaching meditation at the Cambridge Insight Meditation Center located in Boston, Massachusetts. He's currently a participant in the 4-year Insight Meditation Teacher Training Program, where he studies with renowned teachers, including Joseph Goldstein. Now, I learned about Matthew through the 10% Happier podcast, and I learned that he was actually involved with the 10% Happier company, which has a really wonderful meditation app called, well, yeah, you guessed it, 10% Happier. Within the app, he hosts a podcast for subscribers called 20% Happier. And during that podcast, he works with people that have challenges in their lives. And he takes them and the listener through the issue to suggestions for practice and to the outcome. And I thought that's a really unique approach to learn from others' challenges. So who knows? Maybe you'll check it out and maybe you'll find it interesting. But what I know you will find interesting is my chat with Matthew. So please enjoy. Well, Matthew, thank you for taking the time to join me today. It is such an honor to have you here and to be able to chat with you.
It's a pleasure to do this, Robin, to get to have this conversation.
So I thought I'd start with a quote, and it goes like this: you can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf. And that's a quote from Joseph Goldstein. And I'm wondering, when you hear those words, what comes to mind for you?
Well, what comes to mind first and foremost is Joseph as a really dear and inspiring person in my own life. I don't know if it's that you have done a little research and known that I have spent a lot of time learning from Joseph, or just, the serendipity of your appreciation of his teachings. But the first thing that comes to my mind is that, these are the words that are coming from somebody who is really a sincere student of life and a really adept teacher at how to live without creating too much unnecessary suffering in one's life, and, just to say something about the content of that, like, it's really simple and beautiful image, but, quite profound teaching. The thing that strikes me, Rob, is just that it points to the fact that despite our most desperate wishes in our most difficult times, we can't control the circumstances that we have to live through. And what we can control is our responsiveness to the conditions that are around us. And that choice, those choices of how we respond to those conditions, can mean the difference between drowning and having the time of our life.
That's good. Thank you. So one of your primary activities in life is as a meditation teacher. And I'm wondering if you can share a little bit about your journey as to how that came to be.
Well, just to say, my journey as a meditation teacher, I think, starts and ends in some ways, I hope, with my relationship to meditation primarily as a student. And so maybe the place that I'll start is just the point in my life where I felt most motivated to seek out tools for how to live well. And that happened for me when I was just a young adult. I was in college, and I had decided to go to music school, which was a little bit of a risky endeavor. I was taking out quite a bit of student loans to go to music school and not really sure how that kind of degree would end up paying them off. But I was a really passionate student of jazz piano at the time. And I ran headlong into a pretty profound period of doubt about my potential and my future as a performance pianist. And just a part of my, genetic makeup to some degree, I guess, and natural propensities. I have a tendency when the going gets tough towards depression. And I had seen that already in my life. I was young, but I had already seen it. And that was when I was 13, actually, I think was when I got first diagnosed and had serious enough clinical depression to be put on antidepressants, even as a young 13-year-old, and really struggled tremendously in my adolescent years. And in many ways, finding my self-confidence as an artist and as an improviser, as a musician, was a part of what helped shore me up, really, and take the next step in life. But then as I got to this next step, tremendous self-doubt set in, and I got into spirals of a lot of self-hatred and true misery. And over a few years, decided to give up my instrument and my vision for my future. And at that time, I really felt like I lost my whole identity. I didn't really know who I was or where I was going. And with that tremendous level of uncertainty about what my life was about, I turned toward any direction I could find that could provide some advice or pointers on how to live well. And some of the places that took me was to Buddhist teachers, particularly the Dalai Lama and Thich Nhat Hanh, who's just recently passed away, in fact. And it was coming into contact with their simple beginning meditation instructions early on that gave me a sense that my mind is something that has caused me tremendous pain in my life, that has felt outside of my control, but in fact, I can build a relationship to it. I can influence the conditions in the mind, and that what's ultimately true is that my mind can be a good place to be. And I have some say about that. And this really inspired me. And so I started to pursue meditation as, really my primary pursuit in life, in the wake of having given my life to study of music.
So you're very humble because you went to a world-renowned school, Berkeley School of Music. And so you must be quite talented as a jazz musician. And I'd like to ask first, do you still play? Have you found yourself back to the piano?
That's a fascinating question because it's a little bit of an interesting story. I left playing the piano because just early in my relationship with meditation, as I was starting to build a relationship with my own mind, starting to have my own back, starting to really try and find ways to befriend the mind, I saw that the patterns of self-hatred and shame and self-judgment were so toxic when I tried to approach the instrument that it wasn't actually a healthy and good thing for me to be doing. And many years later, I found that I was not longing for the life that I left, and that actually it didn't seem like pursuing music was some fundamental core part of who I was. And I felt utterly complete, I'd say, in many ways, particularly because of the spiritual developments that happened in my life by investing in meditation. And so I expected, Rob, probably, I don't know, 10 years into my journey with meditation, never to go back to music in any kind of way. And to say I was at peace with that is kind of a understatement. Is like I just felt deeply content. And then I was doing a self retreat. I had an opportunity come up where I could spend a little bit over a week by myself in meditation. And I had gotten a new job a little bit earlier. And so I had a little space before the job started, and I knew I was going to have some money coming in. So I decided not to do the retreat at home, but to go up to Vermont to a little cabin in the woods. It was an Airbnb rental. And I got to the cabin, and there was a piano in the cabin. And I, formerly being a piano player for 10 years, I had been going from place to place, and you see pianos everywhere. And so I didn't think too much about it, but I was practicing diligently, sitting and walking morning to evening. And about the fourth day, totally unexpected, I just decided to sit down at the instrument for the first time in many, many, many years. And I can't explain it. And I sometimes hesitate to tell stories like this because I don't want to give the impression that people should expect things like this from meditation. But here in the middle of this silent meditation retreat, where I had not been speaking and had just been practicing and watching the mind for a few days, I sat down at an instrument that I hadn't played in many years. And all of a sudden, my technique was not what it was. The fingers didn't move quite as easily as they had in the past, but my musicianship was farther developed than it had been when I stopped. And I found that I understood and could play complex pieces of music that I didn't really understand so well when I had last played the instrument. And honestly, I could not explain why that was the case, but I found that I felt incredibly free playing. I didn't feel like I was struggling with any of the things that had plagued my relationship to the instrument. And that showed me that there was some possibility of some ease and delight in playing the piano. And so now to this day, I have a really gentle and humble relationship with playing the piano, which is that I have a piano now in my home, and maybe a few times a month, not so often, I sit down and I don't play for anyone else. I don't play any songs that I ever learned in the past, but I just sit down and see if I can make sounds that are pleasing to the ear, and I let it be truly play. And if I notice any subtle, hints or gestures of judgment or contraction or criticism or something like this in the mind, then I understand that those come from my deep conditioning, and I let it go. And so I have a very kind of exploratory and simple and playful relationship to the instrument that I wouldn't say is a real practice or something like that, but it's more of a joy in my life.
In some ways, I wonder if it is a bit of a practice because you are noticing certain emotions arise and you're allowing them to go and go on with the joy of this skill that you have. And in a way, that does seem a bit like a practice to me, at least.
It is. And I'll say this actually, that in many ways, playing the piano as an improviser, as a jazz improviser, was my first contemplative practice at a time where I was really tormented with a lot of struggle. That time in my adolescence I talked about. At that time, the practice of sitting down at an instrument and trying to express the feelings that were inside through music, and totally running underneath the cognitive faculties of the mind, right? Not having to express the feelings in words, not having to think thoughts or write about what was being felt, but just to develop a fidelity to what was being felt in real time and see as it was changing if I could make sound that represented what I was feeling. That was really my first mindfulness practice.
Mm. So back to becoming a meditation teacher. You shared a bit when we spoke earlier prior to this recording that you went to a meditation center in Boston. And I remember you saying a bit about hanging around. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. I remember, we were talking a little bit about how I ended up teaching, and really, I just shared, and I would want to share the story because I think it's important for people to hear, especially if there's some ambition about finding an opportunity to teach, just the different pathways that it can come from. For me, I started going to a local meditation center, the Cambridge Insight Meditation Center, and I just wanted every opportunity to practice that I could find. And so I started signing up for classes, and it seemed like such a valuable thing in my own life, but also in other people's lives, that I wanted to support what they were doing. And so I kind of made a vow to myself, you could say, that if anybody asked me for anything to support meditation in general, I would say yes. And so I volunteered for a ton of things, whether it was setting up the meditation hall and putting all the cushions in place, to cleaning up afterwards, or, I made the little printout calendar of the monthly schedule, or folded envelopes for mailers. I just kind of did anything that needed doing. And I was a really sincere learner. I was spending as much time as I could. I remember at that time, I had one day off a week because I had an internship, and I decided to cut my intern hours in half so that I could have 2 days off of work a week, so that one day I could devote to meditation. And so on Thursdays, I spent the morning sitting and walking in meditation from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. And I took lunch for an hour, and then I would volunteer for the rest of the afternoon, and then take a meditation class in the evening. And so I spent every Thursday like that for some years, in addition to showing up on other nights and things. So over time, people around this center just got to know me as somebody who was really sincere, and they got to build a relationship with me and my meditation practice. And then people just started recommending that I help out with something that required more responsibility. And eventually that meant invitations to support a group that was meditating in a local prison, or a group of people of color who were practicing meditation at the meditation center. And slowly but surely, more invitations came saying, hey, we could use some help, supporting these practitioners with their practice. And it just built from there. And I think really the reflection that I have looking back is that I built relationships with people that were based around my sincerity of practice and study as a student, and everything flowed from there.
Mm-hmm. Seems like such a beautiful lesson, really. And sincerity is a great word that kind of clicks for me in terms of just showing up, being sincere, and whatever happens from there happens. And this is what ended up happening.
Yes. But, one thing I'll say about it is that I had a lot of conditioning that I think a lot of men have, particularly, is important to call out, to be, like we talk about being a lone wolf. I really, still to this day, do not have a very relational bent. It's not my first instinct is to make a connection. And to spend time building connections with folks. And I've grown a lot in this area over time, but that was really a practice for me. I started as somebody who wanted to learn meditation just by reading books and, listening to audio courses and do it by myself. And then I needed to actually step out of my comfort zone and do this in community with other people. And through the relationships, actually, that's how everything else developed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You also shared with me that you found that meditation was an opportunity to learn. I'm wondering if you could share what you meant by that.
Well, yeah, this, I think, in many ways is actually just kind of my fundamental view of what meditation is about for me. And different meditation practices are designed to yield different types of experiences and results. And I come from a school of meditation where the primary orientation, not the only, but the primary kind of quality of mind that we're developing is mindfulness. And in the practices that have mindfulness as a foundation, I would suggest, this is just one man's opinion, but that the orientation is actually just to learn from life. That's all that's going on. And this is how I relate to my own meditation practice. I see that there are a lot of ways that my mind gets in its own way. A lot of ways that I create misery for myself, I would say in a really colloquial way, that's just unnecessary. And, this living organism is designed to not put itself in danger, in harm's way, to move away from that which is unpleasant and to try and find safety and what is enjoyable. And so if I pay enough attention to the places in my life where I'm getting in my own way and creating unnecessary struggle, I don't actually have to strategize how to stop doing that or figure out a new way to live. In fact, if I just bring enough awareness to it, the organism is intelligent enough to say, ouch, that hurts. I'm not going to do that anymore. And so my approach to meditation very much is that I take some time to get quiet and just become a student of whatever my life looks like for those few moments, such that the organism can learn how to be in harmony and in balance with life when it expresses itself that way, whether I'm exhausted at the end of a workday, exhilarated, whether I'm sad, whether I'm delighted. Those are moments in life to be learned from and to continue to refine my capacity to be intimate and in harmony with.
What's arising for me as you speak a bit is what it feels like to be in the present moment. And I'm wondering if you can share a bit about how somebody who maybe is not a regular practitioner of meditation or not at all, what does it really mean to be in the present moment? And why is that useful?
I find that it's a little bit like waking up out of a daydream and recognizing where you are. Much of our life, we're actually moving through the world in a kind of trance of a narrative or a story that our thoughts are narrating for us. We wake up in the morning and our thoughts tell us what's happening. Oh, you woke up early this morning. Oh, you woke up late this morning. And then very quickly how to feel about that. We've got a lot to do today. You probably should be worried if you can accomplish it all, right? And we don't even notice that this is happening, but there is this narrator telling us, how to feel. And often in order to do that, it's referencing the past and referencing the future. This is what's going to happen. Be worried. It'll be just like that other time about a month ago. So, you know, you need to be concerned, right? And so we spend a lot of time in this trance of listening to the inner narrator. Yeah. And I find that that feels a little bit like being in a dream or a daydream. And all of a sudden, we can find in moments when we're not meditating that we're actually just really attuned to what's happening in the present moment. It happened for me quite recently. I got talked into going snowboarding, which is something that I gave up many years ago when I was younger. And I expected that it was going to be basically a exercise in, you know, masochism. And it turned out that after about half a day, I had a few moments where I needed to pay incredibly close attention to what I was doing so as not to hurt myself. I needed to be really aware of what was happening and my relationship to what was happening. And my attention was absolutely just suffusing my sensory immediate experience. I was awake and alive, paying attention to the feeling of the air on the skin, paying attention to the beautiful views that I could see from the mountain, but really alert and aware, careful, attentive, right? Because if I wasn't attentive, then I would probably fall. So I wasn't in a total flow state. You know, sometimes, you know, performance athletes will talk about being, or you know, performing arts people will talk about being in flow state. But I wasn't quite there. I was very awake and alert about exactly what was happening. And not that you're not in that place during a flow state, but it was a little bit more of an ordinary waking consciousness, but I was not lost in some narration about the past and the future. And I was really just utterly present. And it's possible, even when we sit down at the end of a day or just after we had our coffee in the morning, and relate to our ordinary state of mind and the ordinary sensations of body, the ordinary sounds that appear in our home, with that level of commitment, interest, care, and attention. And we can train the capacity to do that. And it feels like waking up out of the dream of the narrator and into the life that we're already living.
For many, it's easier to find that feeling, so to speak, when we're in nature. Yes. Such as when you were snowboarding, and where I happen to live, I'm surrounded by nature, so it feels a little easier. But I used to be in a very urban area. You're in a very urban area. Yes. For those that are listening that are in that kind of scenario, how can you tap into that in a busy city with lots going on constantly?
Oh, I've got two things that I really want to recommend, because I'm a city kid and I grew up in the city, and I actually do love being in nature. Some folks who grew up in the city don't really love being out in nature with the bugs and everything else. I love being out in nature, but there are definitely ways to tap into this capacity for kind of like joyful and wakeful, deeply connected and inspired presence in the midst of just, you know, the concrete and the garbage truck and all the rest. And one that I'll recommend actually has to do with listening and hearing. When we, you know, this in part comes because I'm a deep appreciator of music. You know, if you go see a concert, you get excited to hear the music you're going to hear, and you're paying attention. You're listening to the drums. You hear a certain sound, you know that's the drums. You hear another sound, you know that's the bass, or this is the first violin, and you know this is the cello section, right? Whatever type of music you're into, you hear these sounds and you understand that they're intentional and that they can be appreciated just aesthetically for the sake of the sonic landscape, right? You can take 5 minutes in your life in the city, and the city is full of sound. And you can imagine that every sound was being played by a musician. Instead of the drums, you have the garbage truck. Instead of the sax, you have the birds chirping, right? Instead of the cello, you have your neighbor's barking dog, right? And for just a moment, instead of listening to the sounds and thinking, yep, there goes the garbage truck, the same guys are probably, making their rounds today. Instead, just listen to the quality of the actual noises that are hitting your ears and imagine that they're part of a concert that's being played, right? And you'll find that there's a richness of the most ordinary experience that we don't pay attention to as soon as we change the quality of our attention. When we only pay attention to it halfway, it's only halfway interesting. But when for just a few moments we really give ourselves to it, it becomes a whole new world. Yeah. And I got one more that I want to mention about living in the city and how can we access what we might be able to access when we're in nature. You are not outside of nature when you are in the city. If you look at a beautiful vista of desert or mountains, or you stand on a beach and look out over the ocean, you think of that as nature. But this human organism, this human body, and this human mind are miraculous and unique and special in this universe. Like, we're on a rock hurling through empty, vacuous space, right? And if you traveled from another planet to Earth, you'd look at the human beings and be like, that's an amazing wild creature right there. You yourself are just as much a miracle of nature as anything you might witness anywhere. And so it's possible actually to sit down in meditation, to close your eyes and have a relationship to everything that happens in your own mind. The old replay of that argument with your sibling, right? The regret you had about the thing you said to your ex, the anxiety that you feel about what's happening at work, and to see all those things like you'd see a beautiful pattern in the weather in nature, or a herd of buffalo, right? Or a hummingbird landing on a flower. It's just a story that tells you that some of those things are nature, and the, worry about the argument with the boss is not nature. All of those are miraculous natural occurrences. And it's possible to take a moment to just experience them as such.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
So I know what a good friend of mine, Anise Kavanaugh, calls being richly scheduled. I understand you are richly scheduled.
That's true.
What are your mechanisms to get through busyness and organize it and keep your mind and your body in a good place?
This is so much about the story we tell ourselves about our busyness. There are definitely some practical things that I can share that I have learned from my own mistakes about making sure that you've got a balance in your life so that you can continue to pursue the things that matter to you and show up for the people that you love and care about and are committed to. But first and foremost, the thing that's going to make the biggest difference is what your mind does in relationship to the idea of busyness. Because ultimately, every single person on earth is equally busy. I was actually just talking to my good friend and colleague about this. He has a daughter who's 1 year old. She turned 1 yesterday. And he said he had a parent-teacher conference with her teacher a month ago. And he was thinking, why on earth do I need to go to a parent-teacher conference for an 11-month-old? Like, what could this possibly be about? And he sat down, him and his wife, and the teacher pulled out a binder full of his daughter's drawings, pictures with her and her friends, and said, okay, so here's a big milestone that she hit where she was able to recognize right off the bat that the finger paint wasn't actually food. So right off the bat, she picked up the paint and started painting with it. Here's the different drawings she's been working on. She's developing her relationships with the other kids in these ways. She started out like this, now she's like that. And he said, during this meeting, my mind was blown, and I realized that while I'm at work, my daughter is having this full life that I'm not even aware of or involved with. And I pointed out to him that that's her work, actually. And that, in fact, she's just as busy as he is, right? And all of us are awake and aware for every moment of the day that we're awake and aware. And our attention is being consumed and is busied by something. And so for me, it doesn't matter if I've got 11 meetings scheduled in a day or one meeting scheduled in a day. In fact, my day is just as full ultimately because I have just the same amount of moments to respond to my life. And so to recognize the degree to which you're telling yourself a story that you're just so busy and you can't handle it all, or too many people need too many things from you, or you're going to fail because you're not able to keep up with everything. This kind of narrative actually is the most painful part of a busy schedule. And so, in fact, just to recognize that any sense of it being too much is really just a signal that you're concerned that you may not show up and be the person that you want to be for certain responsibilities that you have. And that flip changes everything. And you can then very generously and graciously start to let go of anything that you need to let go of in full integrity, knowing that I can't be the person that I need to be if I'm doing this in addition to these other things. And so this fundamental change in perspective allows for a little bit more of the, practical brass tacks of creating a schedule that's workable.
Part of your rich schedule involves being involved with a company called 10% Happier. Can you share a little bit about what 10% Happier is, and then some of the work that you're doing with them?
Well, 10% Happier is a organization that is doing something that I was a little bit skeptical about for the first moment that I heard about them. I came to meditation on my own, looking for like the deepest traditions of wisdom from the time immemorial of humans looking at how to live well. And I heard about 10% Happier and heard, okay, there's a news anchor named Dan Harris, and he's found that mindfulness and meditation are helpful. And he's spreading that news to people. And I thought, well, that's great. And I'm really interested in the, deep stuff over here. I want to go on the long, intensive, silent retreats and all of this. So I don't really need to be bothered with this little, mindfulness project over here. And as I got to know the folks over at 10% Happier, I got to see that number one, they're all very serious meditation practitioners. And what 10% Happier is doing is looking at how to help people find the inner resources to bring their best to their life in any situation that they're in, to their communities, to their relationships, and to their work, and just to their moment-to-moment well-being. And one of the most foundational ways that 10% Happier is doing that is through teaching people about some of the wisdom that comes from the meditation traditions and how to meditate for those people that are ready to actually try it out, right? Most of us have tried meditation, and many of us have been like, I don't think I'm well suited for that. And usually that means that the person hasn't got quite the right instructions. And so now that I've joined the team over here, we're like really committed to making sure that people find an approach to meditation that can actually work from them. that can work for them and that they can see the benefit of in their lifetime, you know, in their day to day.
And now you host a podcast within the app that 10% Happier has called 20% Happier.
Yes.
So
yes.
How did we get from 10 to 20? And then what's 20% Happier all about?
Well, so, you know, 10% Happier, you know, we have a podcast. We've got Dan Harris wrote a best-selling book by the name 10% Happier. We've got an app where people can watch videos about meditative sensibilities and do guided practices, learning how to meditate. And we were asking this question, we were kicking this question around for those people who've just started to practice meditation on their own. How could they go deeper? You know, how could we take this from 10% happier to 20% happier, which is this joke that we were kicking around internally. It turns out that we are totally not creative. And we decided that that joke was the best possible title for the answer to how to take this a step further. And we decided that it's well and good to try a guided meditation, to feel a little calmer, to make that a regular part of your life. A lot of people begin to feel like their life has radically changed if they start to listen to guided meditations regularly. But a question comes up for people who've gotten to that point, that is, how do I bring this meditation practice into my life? And once we got to the heart of that question, we also realized that a lot of people, before wanting to invest much in meditation, wanted to understand the answer to that question. Like, if I'm going to spend 15 minutes in my morning every morning doing this thing, how is it really going to be applicable to my life? And so we decided to let people listen in on something that most people never get an opportunity to hear, which is what the conversation is like between somebody who's curious about meditation or experienced at meditation and their meditation teacher. When a person goes to their meditation teacher to say, you want to know what? I'm at wit's end with my kids, or I'm really shaken up about the fact that I'm probably going to die in the next 20 years, you know, or, you know, I've just started a meditation practice, but every time I try and use this set of meditation instructions, I just end up thinking about my to-do list, right? So everything from, you know, big existential questions to relationship issues, you know, with kids or family or colleagues, to like block and tackle, how do I meditate questions? What happens in that conversation between a student and their teacher? And so, you know, essentially I've been having these conversations with people as a meditation teacher for years, and we just decided to record them, to let people get a window into the intimacy of a conversation between a person who's sincerely bringing meditation and wisdom into their everyday life and someone who's going to coach and help them along the way.
A curiosity I have about the organization is, first, do you have to be a practitioner of meditation to join the team? Second, if most are meditation practitioners, as you mentioned, do you find that the interactions are more mindful than, say, a regular company that doesn't have a bunch of meditation practitioners?
Yes. Well, I'll say, you know, there isn't a belief that meditation is the only way to build inner resources and well-being. And so, you know, we do not say that in order to apply for a role to be part of the team, you've got to be a meditator. But people do have to have some relationship to the idea that the mind is trainable, and there are things that we can do that will drastically shift the quality of our mental health and our inner experience of our life, right? And so we do only hire people that are inspired by making a difference for people in building that relationship with their mind in their own lives. Yeah. And most of the time, that means that we're hiring people that have at least tried meditation a fair amount. But in some cases, we hire people that have totally alternative paths in helping build these inner resources for themselves or for other people. But I would say that actually it is, I actually worked in tech startup before coming to 10% Happier. And so coming to a company that makes a mobile app, right, and is creating podcasts and things like that, and seeing the difference in the culture between a standard tech startup and a company who's centered around values of mindfulness, of compassion, basically being human first. I really saw that the company was walking the talk. And that doesn't mean that there aren't moments where people are not at their best. It's a job, and these are other human beings, right? And so nobody's perfect, but I have been incredibly inspired by the fact that because almost everybody that I work with has a personal intrinsic motivation to continue to refine a healthy relationship with their mind, I have watched tremendous amounts of personal growth in almost every one of my colleagues that I've been around for a year or more, which is on its own a very gratifying working experience.
Can you talk a little bit about what you're noticing with anxiety and stress that people are feeling, and more heightened sense of it, even, before, I'll say, the pandemic? I know I'm hearing more and more about it, from people that I work with, and outside of who I work with, and so what are you seeing, and then what types of advice or wisdom might you be sharing with them?
Yeah, I think it's really meaningful that you're pointing to this, Rob, because as a meditation teacher, I'm meeting with people that I have known for many years just to support the development of their meditation practice. And so I'm very fortunate in getting to talk to people about their relationship to their mind. And so I get to see how people are doing on a really deep level. And I would notice, and I'm no exception to this either, that times are harder for people right now than they have been, certainly in the pandemic, but very specifically, we're recording this right now at the end of January in 2022 here in this second winter of this global pandemic. And for those of us who are in the Northern Hemisphere, temperatures are colder. People are not spending as much time outside, but also with the surges in different variants that are coming up of the COVID-19 virus, people are less connected to each other. And, very much we're getting exhausted as individuals by the isolation and collectively, and not having access to the things that bring us joy. A couple of days ago, I went to go do some work from a cafe near my apartment because I thought it would bring me some energy to be out of the house. And just in the couple of days since I had been there last, they decided to close their indoor dining. And so I took my laptop and things and walked home. And, that's not a huge problem ultimately, but we're all experiencing little things like this, where the things that we want to do for ourselves that are kind and to help ourselves get through are not accessible in the ways that we've been used to. And I'm noticing that rates of anxiety with the people that I work with are way up, and that people are, not having an easy time this winter. And one of the things that I think it's important to acknowledge, especially for anyone listening, is that we're all going through it together. And it seems to be in the water at the moment. And so, you asked a bit about some things that that people can do. And this is a really important thing. Back to where you started at the very beginning with this quote from Joseph, that we can't control the waves, but we can learn to surf. I probably botched it a little bit, but
Let's see.
Yeah,
You got it.
yeah, something like that. But that's the thing. You can't control whether the mind is waking up or going to bed anxious. And that's a really important thing to hear, because many of us will take it as a personal failing that the mind is struggling, that we are experiencing difficult mind states, as if we asked for them, right? It's like we take it as some kind of personal failing that we're feeling anxiety or struggling in some way. And so to recognize that this is not within one's control, the conditions come together for a mind state of depression or anxiety or of numbness to arise, and then they arise in the mind. And the question is, what do you do next? And, because so many people are feeling anxious, I'll start there. Actually, 10% Happier recently has decided to rerun our anxiety challenge, which is a week-long opportunity to learn about how to work with anxiety and use meditation as a way to help support times when you're feeling anxious. And so, we're recognizing that this is very much needed. But one of the things that's most important for people to recognize about anxiety is that it's a very multifaceted experience. There's a feeling in the body of anxiousness. There's also a whole torrent of thoughts and thinking that happen for most people most of the time when anxiety is present. And these two components, the felt sense of anxiety and the mental talk of anxiety, they feed off of and fuel each other. And so it's really important for people to recognize that one of the best things you can do to help yourself ride the wave of anxiety when it comes up is to recognize any way in which thoughts are fueling the feeling and feelings are fueling the thoughts. And instead, to simplify, to come into our senses and just pay attention to the area of the felt sense in the body. It doesn't mean that we're going to enjoy the feeling of anxiety, right? But to say, okay, let me give my attention, not trying to push away what I feel. What do I notice when I'm anxious? Do the hands feel weak? Does the throat feel clenched? Does the stomach feel queasy or tensed, right? And to bring your attention into your bodily experience as a way, particularly, to settle down the thinking that's going to fuel the experience. And then from there, there's a couple things we can do to encourage that to go even deeper. I highly recommend a breathing exercise using pursed lips. And so you breathe in through the nose, and then you do a long breath out through the mouth with pursed lips, as if you were trying to blow up a balloon or blow bubbles through a straw. And you can take 10 of those breaths, and one, it'll just give you something to do, to focus on, so you're not lost in the anxious thoughts. Yeah. But two, it's shown to activate the parasympathetic nervous system so that you actually settle down some of the anxious feeling in the body. And what you can do is bring your attention to watching the rise and fall of any sense of activation or tension in the body. And if you pay attention to this exercise and pay attention to the body, it'll usually give you at least a few seconds break at a time from all the anxious thoughts. And this can help people tremendously.
Thank you for that. I thought we could end with another quote. Our ability to connect with others is innate, wired into our nervous systems, and we need connection as much as we need physical nourishment. And that's a quote from Sharon Salzberg. And I thought that came into my mind as you were chatting a bit. And I'm wondering if we could just end with your thoughts on what Sharon has to say there.
It's so beautiful and so real. And, one of the things that I like to do when I teach is just teach from the inglorious everyday examples of my life, because this is meditation is about our real lives. And Sharon is really hitting the nail on the head there. The other day, I was in my apartment and it was messy and I needed to clean it up a little bit. This happens, right? Cleaning's got to happen. And the more that we're at home, the messier the place gets because we're using everything in our home. And it was at the end of a work day and I was tired and I wasn't feeling very motivated. And I decided to call a friend and just to see if they were interested in chatting on the phone while the cleaning was happening, and just for the sake of the company. And my friend actually decided to do the same thing. It's like, oh yeah, I'm overdue for a cleaning. And so we actually spent 3.5 hours the other evening cleaning our places, and at some time spending a long time in silence, busied with the tasks we were taking on. And then when something would pop into the mind, we'd just, chat about something. And just the company actually made the whole process not an arduous task or an opportunity for self-judgment, like how'd I let the place go this much, all of that. It became something that I felt I had energy to do and that brought me joy. And the reason was purely the connection. And so, to look at the moments where we're not doing so well and see if maybe the answer isn't fixing the mind or pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps, but it's putting our arm around somebody else's shoulders, metaphorically or in a real way.
Thank you. Matthew, thank you for your time. I'm so grateful to you. And it was just such an honor to chat with you.
Rob, it's a real pleasure. I wish we had more time to talk. So maybe we'll do this again sometime.
I would love to. And to all the listeners, I'm grateful for your time. And as always, I wish you much love and gratitude.